Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday, Eastern Standard Time, at noon, and taking a topic deep dive and having a good time while doing it. I got a pretty exciting show planned for you guys today. As you guys are popping on, do me a favor and say what's up. I have to make sure that all right, I think Jesse, what's going on, brother man? Johnny Groob in the house. What's going on? Aaron, good to see you, darling. Jamie, what's up, brother man? All right. So I think I'm coming in okay. This thing saying that my connection's low. I don't know what that means. Let me see if I could close some stuff down on my computer. No, I mean, everything that's on I pretty much need. So hopefully that works out. All right. So before we get into it, as usual, I'm trying to be responsible. You guys got to start reminding me because I forget all the damn time. If you guys are watching and not getting my emails, most of you guys that comment do get the emails. But for those of you that are watching that are not yet on the list, you know, I'm streaming on Facebook and a couple of Facebook pages and YouTube. Go to masterchimletter.com, get on my emails. They're free. I send them every day. If the topic of the email is overlapped or offset with something you're interested in, there's always a quote of the day in addition to that, which usually is disconnected from the content or topic of the email. So there's always some goodies going on. And that's where I keep everybody up to date with programs that I got going on, events, etc. So all that being said, description, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, all the info is in the description. So today we have a pretty good good topic planned, and this was inspired by, I was watching a video the other day, and there's a psychologist. I don't know his name. I might be even assuming he's a psychologist, but I've seen him before. He has this sort of very like low-key, nonchalant, almost stoic effect where he speaks slowly, and I think he has an accent. He might be like an older European guy, white guy. I don't know his name, but he was talking about, he's got a lot of good stuff. I should probably, research this before I start bringing it up. But he was talking about how children, when they are young, they are isolated when acting out. And I'm paraphrasing some of the stuff he said. And how what that does is it disincentivizes the child from developing and pursuing his own identity. Meaning he is going to be punished with disconnection, isolation, for becoming frustrated as he is developing a relationship with his environment. We see young kids, throwing tantrums, getting frustrated, etc. And what he's saying is it's a mistake. I even think he throws some shade on Jordan Peterson at one point. I don't know if he does that directly, but basically saying, Jordan Peterson saying when a child isn't behaving properly, whatever, let him be by himself. And when he can act normally, he could, join the group again. And I think some of the terminology in there indicates, certainly if you've been following me for a while, where I stand on it. Like, I am never going to incentivize people to be normal. I am certainly going to train and incentivize young people to be functional. And being functional may be acting normal if they choose. But to, at the core of an identity, to resemble the mean of a large group, that requires you to excise, to cut off the identity, the individual, right? Which is something that I'm not an advocate for. So, John Wiley, what's up, brother man? I got a fucking heater on right now. If you guys could see this, I got a heating pad on my lower back. No, I don't have my fucking period or anything. I think that's why women use a lot of these things. But I fucked up my lower back the other day, and I put this heating pad on, and it's literally singeing my skin right now. So I'm trying to talk, and I'm probably a couple of minutes away from smelling burnt flesh. So I'm going to take that off, and there you go. All right. So what was I saying? So the idea of it is, you guys may have heard me say before this metaphor that I use when it comes to forging the man, the metaphor of a sculptor, and how in the beginning of life, the individual is accumulating a lot of clay, right? And the clay is experiences and insights and preferences that are discovered in certain situations. Whatever it is, they all fall under the metaphorical thing, the clay in this framework, right? This model. And at a certain point, there's enough clay accumulated to start now sculpting, to start removing that away. And I think that happens usually in the 20s. If I were to just give a decade of life, that I would say this is most commonly happening. And a lot of that has to do with, in the 20s is where people start to have a little bit more experience. They start engaging things outside of their childhood bubble and ecosystem. And they get to sort of pressure test a lot of their beliefs, preferences, etc. So in their 20s, I think that sculpting process starts transforming. Might happen earlier for some, later for others. I don't think that process ever stops, mind you. I think there's still clay being added. There's still sculpting that's being done. But the idea of it is not so much as building a strong man, with the title of today's talk, in terms of taking stuff that isn't there and putting it on top of who we are, but really it is building in terms of this process of getting stimulation, reacting to the stimulation, and wind up being stronger as a result of that process, right? So, John Wiley, what's up, brother man? Yarn Saxa, what's up, Don? Good to see you. So let's get into a couple of things here, and I just gave some things, whatever, some talking points. I don't know if the talking points framework, whatever. I took some notes down so I could stay on topic. When it comes to, if you guys saw in today's thumbnail, I put two adjacent characters, like identical, based on my face, and one of them's like this big behemoth colossus looking motherfucker, and the other one's this frail, like this motherfucker needs medicine. And on the big one, I put forge, and the other one I put melt. What are those terms meaning? What is the model that I'm trying to communicate when I'm using those terms? An individual, if he is not pressured, he is not going to be stimulated. If he's not stimulated, there's no response to the stimulation. If you've never faced a problem, you've never solved a problem. We could say that the power that we have in life is really an accumulation of stress responses. Either a resilience we built to friction, or the ability to solve problems because of how many problems we've engaged. So we become a more effective problem solver. But without that stimulation in the form of pressure, there's really not the impetus to start developing or adapting or transforming, evolving, etc. In other words, and you guys have heard me say before, we want to build a gratitude for the stress system or this process in general. It doesn't mean you got to be grateful for the stress necessarily when it shows up. Your car breaks down on the highway. You don't want to look at the heavens and say thank you. I'm not saying anything like that. But we are grateful that the process is there to help us leverage those experiences. So if we don't face enough stimulation, there's not going to be the impetus for this development. When we do engage it, similar to how I just broke down, we are going to be stressed. We're going to adapt to that stress. And at the end of it, we'll be stronger for it. However, there is a pace at which people can leverage the stress they're being exposed to. When these people leverage the stress effectively and are able to maintain a pace, leveraging that stress that is equal to or greater than the pace at which stress is engaging the person, then they will develop. In other words, they need to be able to process the stress faster, as fast or faster than the speed at which the stress shows up. When the stress is exposed to the individual at a pace that's greater than the individual's pace or speed to process it, that's when the individual breaks down. When they do it in a way where they can keep up with it, that's when the forging process is occurring. When they can't keep up with the pace of the stress, that's when they are melting. A bunch of different metaphors I use for this, and it would be nice if I could find some just like universal metaphor that everything fits in, but it's usually one for this, the other for that other thing, and etc. When people do not have a pace that allows them to leverage the speed at which they're exposed to the pressure, that's where my bucket model fits in. The bucket model is the amount of stress or trauma an individual could hold on to, represented in a bucket. The stress or trauma is actually filling up the bucket. There are holes in the bucket that allow that to dissipate. The holes in the bucket are the things that allow us to adapt, which means if we're saying that we want to create a process by which we could build a strong man, we have to be able to look at the process or the pace at which we process stress. As we're stressed out, we need to be able to process it. So what does processing it look like? It means, number one, in the face of that level of stress, we're still able to maintain our highest state, right? A high state. If you guys, those of you that are in my mastermind group or do coaching with me, the state on one framework applies to that. I don't think I ever put that up publicly. The state on one framework applies to where we want to be. So in the face of the stress, we could still get our state back on one. Another thing that we need to be able to do is still fulfill our obligations. Every day we have certain promises we have to keep, obligations we have to meet. There are certain tasks we need to accomplish, right? Everybody's got a to-do list when they wake up in some form or another. And again, being able to process the stress that you're facing allows you to continue to check those boxes. So you can maintain your state, you're fulfilling your obligations, doing what you got to do. You're maintaining your health, right? Which could significantly overlap with state, but just to spotlight it for a second, your health is able to absorb it. It's no sense being in a good mood if you're not getting any sleep. You're developing an ulcer. People that have an ulcer can still laugh. They can still smile. So there is this consistency that we want to sort of observe this. When people are not able to maintain that pace and the stress is outpacing the speed at which they process the stress, that's when in the bucket model you start seeing the overflow. And the overflow, as I've articulated in that program, manifests in the sort of opposite of all the things I just listed. So when you have the overflow, you are having what's called a cathartic event. You are required to have a cathartic event. That means that the world vision that you have needs to shut down, and you need to, become a lot more proximal, and you're going to invest a lot more in the micro perspective at the expense of any macro perspectives that you had prior to that. Everything's going to become the here and now. It's either going to be some sort of disconnection, from your day to day. It's going to be some sort of, storytelling driven, depression and self-talk and isolation, and you start spiraling downward. Unless that process of disconnecting relieves that stress enough to where you're back online. We don't want to become overwhelmed to the point where we have those cathartic events, because the recovery from a cathartic event is not something that we are entitled to. It's not something we want to rely on. Sometimes the cathartic event for more fragile individuals is jumping off a fucking roof. So it doesn't mean that we're not going to be stressed. It doesn't mean that we're not going to deal with the stress. But again, the pace at which we're able to process it is something that we need to be aware of. There are going to be times when individuals are taking on too much. You're just doing too much. If I'm going to bench press and I put 225 pounds on the bar and it has a certain effect, I can't tell myself that, well, 450 pounds on the bar will do twice the effect. It's not the way it works. These things aren't correlated that way. So what happens with an individual is he stresses himself, takes on too much stress, and then he breaks down. And how people deal with that breaking down, varies from individual. Sometimes you have the person who just disconnects, isolates, and he erodes who he is. He destroys the life that he's built up to that point, and there are sort of dire consequences. Sometimes the guy uses the fact that he stressed himself out beyond his ability to deal with it, beyond his capacity. He uses that as the rationalization for failing. It's like, oh, well, you gotta be in it to win it, or I was trying, and it's like, well, whereas we do want people to take risks, we do want people to not rely dysfunctionally on certainty and security. We want people to get out there and do things. Movement is mandatory, that whole thing. We also don't want to create a narrative whereby they rationalize their failure because of their ambition. Because my ambition and initiative is so impressive, I drove myself to fail. There needs to be a functional middle ground. Or, if you guys have ever seen my function zone, sometimes there's not enough of a thing, but sometimes there's too much of a thing. And in between those two thresholds is the function zone. And anything that we have the ability to sort of personally set and customize a relationship with has a corresponding function zone. When it comes to stress, sometimes there's not enough stress. I spoke about that before. This really I'm speaking about now are those times where there's too much stress. So now it begs the question, well, if I'm getting stressed out by something that is functional, what am I supposed to do? The guy who, I've used the phrase, the guy who cries when it rains. It's like, well, you can't cry when it rains. I mean, you can, but you shouldn't cry when it rains. Why? Because raining is something that is natural. It is a natural phenomenon. So if you have a traumatic response to a natural phenomenon, I would say that response is unnatural, at its core. So what should we do? Well, you have to build capacity. You have to make yourself stronger. It's why so many people train martial arts and suddenly their marriages are better. Suddenly they're doing better at work. Or they start lifting weights and suddenly their relationships are more productive. And, their optimism, is somehow improved. When prior to that transformation, these two things seemed completely disconnected. Yet one affects the other. Well, it's building capacity. In the 3 roads system, that some of you guys have had access to the manifesto and read me break this down. But it has to do with building the self first. The stronger you are at the level of self, the more robust the alliances and aligned alliances that you could create. If you are a weak, malleable man, most of the time your alliances are going to be determined by luck, coincidence, proximity, these things that have nothing to do with any loyalty or commitment to who you are as a person. The more significantly developed you are at the level of self, the more you have opinions, the more you have a sort of footprint of identity that you could tell either overlaps or does not overlap with the people that you're connected to. And you can make adjustments with alliances based on that. But somebody who has developed their capacity is going to see an alignment all the way through to value, which means their entire life is going to be congruent with who they are. And that's going to look different ways to different people. I'm somebody I'm not a car guy. Like, I don't care about cars. I'm not like the guy that's like, oh man, I want to have a fancy car. Like, I've had fancy cars. Like, it does nothing for me. I know people, though, in my life that they work for their car. It's almost like they're, what they make covers their minimal bills, the rent, lights, food, things like that, and everything else is being spent on this car. That is their pride and joy. Like, I don't judge to the point where they shouldn't do that. We're like, they're covering all the bases. That was one of the things that I created as a preface. But if there's somebody who loves cars, there's somebody that I just can't relate to where that's concerned, which means when somebody has developed who they are as an individual and they've surrounded themselves with people who overlap functionally with that, right? In the manifesto, I say tribe is a force multiplier. So tribe is the one that allows you to be you at a more powerful level. But there are people who will do that, and then they'll reach value, and how they create a life for themselves expressed in the value component of the three roads varies from individual to individual, where you have two people like me who doesn't give a fuck about a car and another guy who is just as aligned, but everything is about that fancy car he gets to sit in every day. Like, that's who he is. That's what he's about. It's different at a significant level, but it is aligned nonetheless, right? So if you have an individual that hasn't developed who he is, he hasn't developed this way to process stress and maintain the pace of his ability to process it. You put too much weight on the bar, you get smashed to the floor. That's not admirable. It's not, like, you are not a martyr for sacrificing yourself to the god of stupidity, right? So for an individual who respects that, he understands you don't want to bite off more than you can chew to the point where you choke. When I look at individuals who they've created a life for themselves where they have so many things, they have this thing, they have the car, the house, the jewelry, right? The fancy vacations, maybe the boat, maybe all the toys, whatever it is. But he looks miserable. He acts miserable. And I could say he acts miserable because I could see very rarely is he able to maintain a good state in a bad situation, which is a great telltale sign, by the way. People who have not aligned their lives, there'll be great in great situations and terrible in terrible situations. So many times the people that you're connected to will betray you in some way. They will be disloyal in ways, and we have the tendency to take it personally, which functionally to some extent we probably should, because it'll motivate us to do what we have to do. But so many times the actions that these people show can be explained away by just observing their lack of alignment. But if we could not justify, but rationalize why they did what they did through this lack of alignment, we should be able to anticipate it before the fact. I know if somebody is redlining every day, and the guy that talks shit about his wife and treats his kids like shit or doesn't treat them like anything at all because he's never with them, like, these are just out of alignment, things that we could see, and just know there's a certain level of pressure where this guy is going to melt. So there needs to be an alignment if we're going to get to the point where we're forging ourselves. There's a pace. Sometimes, when I look at the person, like I'll use a martial arts example, the guy who trains every moment he can, takes it seriously, does everything you're supposed to do. That doesn't qualify him to be a black belt. There is a process, a pace that he has to go through. In other words, a timeline is introduced before this certain level is unlocked in who he is. A similar analogy, similar concept, different application, is if you have a brilliant 5-year-old who is, the 1 percentile, of all 5-year-olds on the planet intellectually, just like that. It doesn't mean that he should be a doctor right now. It doesn't mean that he should be in college right now. It means that, he is very, very equipped, in capacity to deal with everybody else's peers at that level. But it doesn't mean he's supposed to automatically get this. There's a pace. Ironically, getting skipped. I was almost skipped a grade in school. My parents decided against it. And I'm grateful that they did. Why? Because there's a social cost we pay for too. And we see that some kids, if they're skipped in grades within like public school systems, like there is a consequence socially, and they wind up underdeveloped in certain social areas. Now, as somebody who's an advocate for homeschool, I'm not fucking betting the house on this model one way or the other. But what I'm saying is, it's not just the fact that somebody's doing something that gives them the qualification to be something. Sometimes being something is doing something over time, right? There is a pace and a timeline. So sometimes forging who you are, you will have the late bloomer, right? The guy who in his 20s, mid 30s maybe, suddenly everything clicked and he became a crusher in the eyes of everybody around him. But then you also have the people who peaked in high school. The people who they got this identity that was so embedded in the environment that they were in that they spend every day of their lives after it trying to reclaim it. It's the Al Bundy, four touchdowns against Polk High thing. So as an individual, we want to continuously build our capacity. How do we do that? Well, number one, we understand that we need pressure. What does that pressure look like? Well, it depends. We want to pressure ourselves at the scale that allows us to continue to maintain the pace of processing it. Sometimes people have a shitty job that they hate, that if they got fired, though, their whole life would fall apart. And it's like, well, maybe that person shouldn't walk in, and start making demands or suddenly become the guy that's trying to take over the company and ambition and all these. Like maybe he needs to start with, lifting some weights, or maybe he needs to start with reading some mindset content, philosophers or whatnot. Maybe he builds his capacity starting at that level. And as he starts scaling that up, he will notice that his environment, his ecosystem, certainly the tribe and the alliances that he has, all those things will start to evolve also. But they need to happen again at a pace, right? So I think I covered everything here. I was supposed to follow this order, but what are you going to do? Let me see what you guys. All right. Aaron says, wait a second. Oh, you got the shirt. Good. Niels, what's up, brother, man? Good to see you. So what's a good takeaway, for the topic of the day? Your identity, a man's identity, is only forged when stress is applied at a pace that he could process it. In other words, in proportion to his current level of power. And that processing is not only leveraging or implementing that stress, but then allowing a time to recover. I'll use a weightlifting analogy. I can go and have a balls to the wall squat workout to where I feel like, my fucking legs don't work at the end of it. I'm going to need a few days to recover from that in order to experience the benefits of doing it in the first place. Similarly, there will be things in your life that you are stressed about, that you are affected by in some stressful or traumatic way, that you should absolutely leverage and process by, creating a better understanding of it, creating perspective, asking myself, how do I, what opportunity, whatever your process is for using that stress productively, understand there's going to be a timeline after it. The bucket model that I spoke about before, some of you guys have watched that program. I think it's on masterchim.com, still available. You know that it's about having a big bucket, which lets you maintain a lot of stress and trauma at one given time and still remain functional. By still remain functional, I mean it doesn't overflow, which enacts or triggers a cathartic event, which doesn't always is not always going to be something people come back from. So having a big bucket means you could carry a lot. Having a lot of holes means that as it comes in, it goes out just the same. What are these cathartic rituals? Well, I talk about them in Tribalnomics. I talk about them in a lot of programs. The idea is to be able to move, to understand that we have to honor the machine, the body, right? Like we need to exercise. We need to have, in the Master 24-hour cycle, I have the trim framework. A lot of people ask me, why do you have the iron trim, the improvement component of the day? And a lot of it is because by improving who we are, not only we are increasing our capabilities, but we're also spending time with our brain outside of the story of whatever's stressing us out. So sometimes it's a reprieve, right? And sometimes it's the interleaving process of information processing, where our brain, when allowed to do something disconnected, has some time to sort out and develop a better perspective on what we're stressing it out, right? So sometimes we go do something else for an hour or two, we come back and we're actually more capable because we gave our brain a break, to say it simply. So I think that covers everything. Man, this was pretty quick, but I went through everything. I hope that makes sense to you guys. I will say, those of you that, those men that are following this and getting a benefit from it, if you can't invest in being in the Three Roads group, at least get the emails, at least get Tribalnomics, at least look at the programs that I have available on Master Chim, or just go through these live streams, which is another free resource. But the thing is, if you don't have the tools, doing all the work is going to be an exercise in futility. If you have the tools and don't do the work, it's going to be an exercise in frustration. Either way, you don't wind up forging a stronger man. All right. I'm going to leave it at that. I appreciate you guys hanging out. MasterChimLetter.com. Get the emails. I'm here every Wednesday. You know it. I appreciate you all. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.